Okay, so this first video, we're just going to kind of go over the supplies a little bit, and I'm going to explain the changes that I've made. Originally, this quilt was larger. We're going to actually make a smaller size so that we can actually get it done in the next 6 weeks. So what we're using is 7 patterns of fabric in the same series. So this is the Lulu Roses by Tanya Wheeling. I love this fabric. And so we're using 7 half yard pieces of fabric. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. In each of these half yard pieces of fabric, you can actually get 12 6.5 by 6.5 blocks. We only need 8. So if you wanted to go ahead and make it larger, you can. But I like to give you enough fabric so that if you mess up, if you cut one row crooked, or if you, because I'm telling you, sometimes this thing gets a mind of its own. A half yard is going to do you just fine. You're going to be happy you bought that. You're also going to want a white jelly roll if white is the dominating color in your fabric. So if you choose a fabric that has ivory, then you want to go with ivory. I've seen people also use like navy and red, and oh, they've turned out beautiful. I'm always going to lean towards the white or the ivory for my sashing. And you won't need all of this, but again, it's better to have too much than too little. Coordinating thread. You're going to need your rotary cutter, cutting mat, and then of course your big old ruler. You are going to need one that measures 6.5 inches because that's the size of our block. You're going to need some pins, tape measure, your iron. I'll make sure I put all of those supplies on my website. Now, for the first step that we're going to do is we're actually going to cut. I'm just making sure that I've got this right. Yeah, because our quilt is going to be going 7 blocks across and 8 blocks down. Now, this picture on this instruction sheet that I've typed out for you guys, it actually is a larger one. Just ignore this picture. You're going to actually cut off 2 rows there. So that way, this is the actual size that we're going to make. It's going to measure approximately 58 by 66. We're not touching the length. We're just making it 2 rows thinner. Okay, so I'll be back in just a second. Okay, so I've got my first half yard fabric here, and I've got my selvage on the ends. And what I want to do is make sure that my edge is nice and straight. So what I'm going to do is line it up on the right side, and I'm going to trim it. Okay, and the person that cut this fabric did a pretty good job. I don't have to cut very much. I'm going to remove the safety off of my rotary cutter, and now I have trimmed that off. Now I'm going to turn the fabric over. Okay, and I'm going to line this up at the 6.5 inch mark, and I'm going to make my first cut. Now, another piece of advice to give you is technically you are supposed to iron your fabric before you cut it. I don't do that. But if you iron it, it's going to cut straighter, okay? So here's my first 6.5 inch strip. Okay, so I'm just going to line this up at the 6.5. Okay. Now what we want to do is remove the selvage. You can use a smaller ruler for this if you want to. And then what you're going to do is turn it over, and you want to cut 6.5 inch strips. I guess they're not really strips, they're squares. So 6.5. So this gives us 2. And then we're going to cut again. That makes 4. That makes 6. Now we've got to trim the salvage off of this one. And then this final one is going to give us a total of 8. And that's what we want, is 8 squares of 7 patterns of fabric. Okay, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 7, 8. And I do believe I'm probably going to press these so that they will turn out a little bit better. So now I'm going to repeat that same process on the other 7 or the other 6 patterns of fabric. This is what's left over. So if you guys want to go ahead and make the larger quilt, you have plenty of fabric to do so, okay? So when I come back, I'm going to have all of my squares cut, and then we're going to cut our jelly roll strips. Okay, so I've got all of my squares cut. So I've got 8 of this one cut, and 8 of this one, 8 of this one, this one. So I have 7 patterns, and I've cut 8 of each pattern, okay? So that gives me a total of 56 blocks. And I did go ahead and press them because they were too wrinkly to work with. And I have also already decided what my first row is going to look like. But I'm kind of sort of jumping ahead. So I'm going to back up for just a second. The next thing you want to do is make sure that all of your fabric is going in the same direction. So I'm going to show you this method. So that pops really nicely. I'm going to turn it over on the other side. That has a dull pop. That has a nice pop. So I want to make sure that the nice pop on all of these is at the very top. Now I've gone ahead and done that. So just snap it really quickly like that. And all of those are at the very top. Now we want to cut our jelly roll strips. And we need, let me get my instructions out here again really quick. I want to make sure I give you the exact measurements and everything. So you need 49 strips that measure 2.5 by 6.5, and that's going to be these white pieces. Here's a better picture right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to attach a 2.5 by 6.5 strip to the bottom of every single one of these except the last row. So that's why I went ahead and determined what my first row was going to be, because my first row is also going to be my last row. And this is going to be a little hard to explain, but hopefully you guys are visual like I am, and this chart will help you, okay? My first row is this right here. So this pink is this polka dot. The green is this one here. The blue is this one. The yellow is this one. This one's orange, this one's gray, and this is another blue. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take, I have some numbered pens. If you don't have numbered pens, you can use Post-it notes. That's what I usually use. And I'm just going to pen one of these so that I don't lose track of which fabric is going to be what, okay? So Post-it note, numbered pens, whatever method you prefer, just go ahead and label your first row, so that way when you go to attach your 2.5 by 6.5 strip, you're not going to attach it to the bottom row. And I know that might be confusing. The first time I made a quilt like this, I did attach those to that very bottom row, but that bottom row right there is just going to have the sashing. It's not going to be these small strips, which we will cut in just a second. I just want to number these really quick before I get anything mixed up. I've got a couple more to pin here. I told you guys, I warned you in advance that this quilt is a little bit more complicated than the other ones. Using pre-cuts is really my method of, my preferred method of making quilts. Okay, a couple more. Last one, I'll bring it a little closer. Now what I'm going to do is just stack these up and get these out of my way so that we can cut the jelly roll strips. Okay, my nice stack of fabric, I'm going to move that over. We're going to open up the jelly roll. Now we need sashing for the sides and the bottom, and then we need sashing for the bottom of each of those squares. So what we're going to do is open up the jelly roll, and we're going to go ahead and pull out the sashing for the sides. Now what we're going to do is we're going to sew two of them together for our top sashing, for the sashing on the right, the sashing on the bottom, and on the left. So that's 2, 4, 6, 8. So we're going to need 8 for the outside, but then you're also going to need sashing in between each row. So this is another 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. And remember, we're cutting off 2 of our rows. So let me make sure I've got that right. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. That would be correct. So you're going to need a total of 20 of these for your sashing on the outside and on the inside, but not those bottom pieces. So I'm going to pull out 20. So that's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. Okay, so this 20, I'm just going to set that aside so that I don't cut it. That's going to be for the side sashing and in between each row sashing. These are the ones that we're going to cut to measure 2.5 by 6.5. They already measure 2.5, so we're just going to cut them at 6.5. And we only need 49 of those. So I'm going to get this out of the way and get my grid, and we will start cutting. I'm going to move these over. The first thing you want to do is take your jelly roll and you want to cut the selvage off. You want to make sure it's straight. And I usually use a smaller ruler for this. It's upstairs right now, so I will go ahead and use this one. So I'm just going to cut off the selvage part. Now you're going to be able to cut 2 of these at a time, okay? So what I want to do is find my 6.5 on here. You want to make sure that your fabric is straight because you're cutting 2 of these at a time. There we go. Okay, so my ruler here. So I'm going to line up the 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Actually, we need 6.5. This is not the first time I've messed up and cut something at 6. So you're going to cut these at 6.5. You're going to need 49. So we're going to see how many we can get out of one strip. Did I just lock that back? I did. So there's 2. Four. And 6. So we get 6 out of one jelly roll strip. So you can get, we need 49 of these. So I'm going to pull out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 more of these. We don't need these, so I'm going to set those aside. So I'm going to cut 9 of these. That's going to give me 54. So I don't need 54, but I won't cut all of the final strip. So I'm not going to make you watch me cut all of these because I've got to remove the salvage and then cut it 6 1/2. So I will be back when I get done cutting these, okay? Okay, so I am back and all of my fabric is now cut. So we've got our 6 1/2 inch squares. We've got our jelly roll strips that measure 6 1/2 by 2 1/2. And then we've got our sashing. What I've done is labeled this, tied something around it so that if I get distracted or whatever, I won't lose. I will remember what this is basically because I do get interrupted a lot. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to remove the bottom row, because remember I said this bottom row does not get these strips. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the bottom row. The bottom row is exactly like the top row, so it's safe to say that I can just go ahead and remove the pinned ones, okay? So I'm just going to turn that over. Let's see. It's okay if we do this backwards. I hope that this is making sense. If it doesn't, please let me know and I can film a video to correct anything that isn't making sense. It makes sense in my mind, but you never know. I could be wrong. Okay, last one. Okay, so we're just going to set this aside with the sashing because we're not going to touch that. Okay, and then what we're going to do next is we're going to take one of these and one of these. We're going to place them right sides together. This is going to be attached at the bottom, and I'm just going to sew a 1/4 inch seam. In this video, we're going to start with placing our rectangle to our square, and we're going to sew those with a 1/4 inch seam. So what I'm going to do is just take the top one here, turn it over. So I'm going to place my rectangles to the left or to the right and my squares to the left, and then I'm just going to place my first one here on the sewing machine, and I'm going to be doing some chain stitching or chain piecing or chain sewing, whatever you prefer to call it. So I'm going to place it here on my sewing machine. Again, I'm going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam. Just make sure I've got it straight. Now I'm going to remove this first one so that I can show it to you, but then after that I'm going to keep them all on one long strip, okay? So that's what it's going to look like. See? Okay, so let's do another one. I want to make sure that I've kept my grain of fabric in the right direction. Turn this over. I'm going to show you 2 more of these so that I can show you how I chain sew them. I can tell this one moved over just a tad. Okay, I'm going to bring up the next one. Make sure I've got them nice and lined up. Now I am going to remove this from the sewing machine because I'm going to show you the next step. This video is going to be a short video because, to be honest, you have a lot to get done. So I'm just going to place this next one here. And let's see. Now I will tell you, don't pull your jelly roll because the grain of the fabric of that one is not like it is on the squares. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and remove this because I'm going to show you the next step. So here we would separate these and then we're going to press this to the dark side, okay? I'm going to put those out of the way for just a second, and I'm going to pick up my jelly roll strips because I'm showing you just the sewing right now. So we've got 20 strips here that we were saving for our sashing. So while you're at the sewing machine, go ahead and sew 2 of these together. And so you're going to take 20 strips and you're going to end up having 10 long strips. So I'm going to take 2. Now remember, in one of our earlier videos, and maybe I didn't show you that, and I should have, so I'm going to rewind for just a second. On your 20 strips, cut your salvage off, okay? That's this piece right here. So I'm going to pause the camera for just a second, and I'm going to cut those off so that I can show you sewing them together, okay? Okay, so I've got my 2 jelly roll strips. I've just removed the salvage on the end, and what I'm going to do is attach them, placing the right sides together. And just sew with a 1/4 inch seam. I'm just going to place it here. Okay, I'm going to show you that. And then I'm also going to press that, okay? I'm just going to press it open. So if you can see, this is one really long strip, and this is going to be our sashing for both sides, the bottom and the top, and in between each row. So I will continue sewing, and then I will show you pressing the seams, okay? Okay, so I am back. I have sewn all of my rectangle pieces to my squares, and I'm going to show you what to do next. So I'm going to separate them. So I'm just going to snip the threads. And then the last one. Okay, so now we've got all of these ready, and what we're going to do is press those. But first, I'm going to backtrack for just a second because I want to make sure that everybody does the right thing. Before you sew your sashing pieces together, you have to trim the salvage, and I did that behind the scenes a couple minutes ago, but I actually want to make sure that I show all of these steps because we do have beginner quilters, sewers with us. So here's what I do. I take 1 jelly roll strip at a time. You can take more than one. I don't, because you can mess up a whole lot easier. What I'm going to do is place it here on my little cutting mat, and I've got my little ruler here. I'm going to take my cutter and just trim that salvage off. Okay, so then you're going to do that on all of these, all 20 of those, and then sew 2 of them together. And I've already showed you that in the video, so I just wanted to backtrack for just a second and show you how to trim those. Now I'm going to close these back up because, like I said, anything could happen between now and when I'm going to complete this. So I'm just going to get it out of my way and label it so that I don't accidentally cut into it or grab it for some other project. Okay, now I'm going to get my ironing board out. Okay, so I've got my squares here that I want to press the seam. So I'm going to flip it over, give it a little steam, and then I'm going to flip this over, and by doing that, that's going to press that to the dark side. See, if I flip it over, you can see that it's going in the direction of the dark side. So I'm going to do that one more time, or maybe 2 more. So I'm just going to press the seam, set the seam I should say. Sometimes this terminology can get the best of me, especially when I get a little tongue-tied. And then flip that over. Now don't be alarmed. See how this is longer than this? We are going to square up our blocks before we start sewing our rows together, okay? So any area that is short or over, we will fix that. Okay. See? I'm going to show you one more, and then I'm going to stop. And I'm actually going to stop this video because I think that you have quite a bit to do now. Okay, one more. So set the seam, then turn it over and flip it. And by doing that, it automatically puts the puts that on the dark side. Okay? And what we're about to do is square up our blocks, and these are not really squares any longer because we've attached our rectangle strip to our square, but that's still the term that it's called. And so what we're going to take is our ruler here, and I want to tell you before we get started that be very careful about how much you trim off, because if you trim too much, then your quilt, your seams are actually not going to line up very well. So if you come to one that is really off, you might actually want to get your seam ripper out and take it apart and start over. Most of mine, though, it's just because I cut my strip longer, and so it's not too short over here. So if you get a block that it's short on one side and goes over on the other, get your seam ripper out and start over, okay? So let's get this back over here. And what we're going to do is take our ruler and we're going to position just one of the lines on our seam right here. And I can't see very well because I would have to put my head in the camera. You can actually get a better view than I can, but I can see there's just a tad of fabric over here on the right side. So I'm just going to go down this right side. And I'm going to show you how much I trimmed. That is, it's crazy. It's just a little teeny tiny amount. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So I'm going to, again, line up one of these lines on the ruler and just go down this side and trim off anything that's extra. And again, that's how much, which is not that much, but it's still kind of important because you want your quilt to look really nice and you want your seams to line up. So then I'm going to do the same thing for this one. I'm going to show you one more and then we're going to move on to the next step. Okay, this one is seriously crooked. And this is probably one of those that I may have been sewing at night or who knows. Let me turn it over. Okay. Last one. I'm going to show you how much I trim off. So this one had a little bit more. And then now you can see it. Okay? See how nice and clean that is? So I'm going to do that to the rest of these and I'll be back. Okay? Okay, so I've got all of my rectangles squared up. So we're ready to start sewing. So now what we're going to do, this is going to be, we're going to start pinning. And so this is the top of my quilt. We're going to sew our rows vertically, okay? So this is the top, and then we're going to sew this one right sides together. So we're going to attach it to this piece right here, and I'm going to pin it. So we're going to take these to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew those together. Now remember, we saved one from every one of our patterns. This is going to be our last one that we attach at the very end. So I'm going to take that, put it at the end, and now I'm going to get my sewing machine. And I'm probably not going to pin these. So when you see me at the sewing machine, you may not see the pins. Okay? Okay, so now we are about to sew our first row together. So I'm going to take my very top piece. Remember that there's no rectangle up here. And what we're going to do is place this right side together. Making sure I'm lining this up. You can pin it if you prefer. I just want to make sure that I haven't moved it. and that I'm not pulling it. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is open this up. And again, remember, this is the top, okay? So this is the next piece. I'm going to take the next one, place it right sides together, and then repeat that same thing. I am sewing with a 1/4 inch seam. Making sure I'm keeping it lined up. Okay, same thing. Take this one. I'm going to attach the next piece, right sides together. Now, while I'm going to sew this one, or while I'm sewing this one, I'm going to explain the next step. So I am going to sew all of my rows together. These are my vertical rows. And then once I do that, then we're going to add our sashing. So I'm not going to make you wait. I'm going to go ahead and film that next step so that way you don't have to wait on me, because I know some of you are much further along and you're ready to get going. So I'm going to pause for just a second, get this first row done, and then we will add our sashing, okay? Okay, so we are here at the very end, and now we're going to take our final block and we are going to sew it on here. So same thing, we're just going to line it up and sew a 1/4 inch seam. Okay, so this is our entire first row. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take our first piece of sashing and we're going to attach it to this and we're going to sew it. So let me grab that. Okay, so if you remember, our sashing consists of 2 jelly roll strips sewn together, and here is the center. So what I like to do, and I probably should have moved my sewing machine, but I'm not going to. We're going to make this work. We're going to plug along here. So what I like to do is actually line up the seam of the jelly roll with a seam here on my row. So what I've done is I'm placing this together, and here is a seam. So I'm going to pin that, okay? And I hope that you can see this. So I'm lining this up, both of those seams together, and I'm going to pin it. Then what I'm going to do is pin all the way to the right. Now I didn't pin my squares because I was confident that I was going to be able to sew them and not get off track. I am not confident when it comes to sewing the jelly roll strips because they stretch. So I am going to pin them probably every square. So not a lot, but enough that it will keep me straight. So like I said, I'm pinning all the way to the right. Now you're going to have extra. What we're going to do is sew this on, and then after we sew it on, we will cut that off when we've made sure that we've sewn it correctly. Sometimes I've found that if I cut it early, then when I get to the very end, it's a little short. So now I've pinned to the right. Now I'm going to pin to the left. And the same thing, it's going to be a little bit long at the beginning, but we will trim that once we've sewn it. I should put my pins a little bit closer to myself. I want you guys to see all of this so that you're comfortable doing it yourself. Just a couple more pins. And I'm going to pause the video and confirm that I was in the camera before I start sewing. So you will see a pause again. Okay, the last pin. See how this is the very beginning? But it's important that we lined up those seams. Okay, so I'll be back in just a second, and we're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam. Okay, so we are ready to sew our sashing onto our first row. So I'm going to take out that first pin, line this up. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to start up here at the top. And I'm going to sew all the way to the end. You may want to stop occasionally and just make sure that nothing's moved or shifted. Okay, so now if we open this up, we can see, I should say, that we have our very first row with its sashing. So now what we need to do is trim this piece off on the top and at the bottom. So I'm going to move the camera and I'll be back. Okay, so what we're going to do now is trim off this extra sashing that we have here. So I'm just going to make sure that I lay it flat. You can see all my extra thread there. My bobbin ran out there towards the end, so I've got some extra thread I need to cut off. And so now what I'm going to do is just line up my ruler with the edge there. And hopefully I can see. I'm having a hard time. Let's make sure that all that fabric is out of the way. Okay. I think that's straight. Let's check it. It may be a little long, but that's okay. It'll be fine. We can trim it again. And now we're going to do the same thing up here. So I'm just going to turn it over and line this up. Okay, so now we can see our first row. This is the top, so this is to the right. This is our first row with its piece of sashing. So now for your homework, let's cover that real quick and then we'll stop this video. So now I have to finish my other rows. So what I'll do is, sew each of the blocks to each other, and then when I get my second row done, I'll come in with my next piece of sashing. So the next time you see me, I'm going to have each row done with the sashing added to the right side. And if you guys remember, I went ahead and determined my rows. So this is 2 through 7 that I need to finish. So I have sewn my strip to all of my rows, and now we are ready to set the seam and press them. So all I'm going to do is take my iron and just press. This is setting the seam, and if you've watched many of my videos, this is a step we usually always do. what we want to do is we've got the same piece and we want to press our seam to the dark side. And although this is not that dark, we don't want it going over the jelly roll strip. Okay, so I've got started just a little bit, and you just want to press, and you just want to make sure that your seam is on the dark side. Let me get to a section that I haven't already pressed. Okay, so here we are. So row 1, row 2, we're going to turn this over, place this right sides together, and we are going to pin it. Okay, so what I'm going to do is get this entire row kind of lined up. Okay, just like that. And then I'm just going to kind of fold it up a little bit right now and go back to the beginning here, and we're going to pin. Now this I do pin, and I pin a lot because I want it to be straight. So make sure I'm in the camera here. I'm going to line up the edge here right there, okay, and I'm going to pin it. Now before I go over to the right, what I want to do now is come down here at the bottom and pin this far left side as well. Sometimes I've found that your fabric will shift if you allow your bottom to shift as well. So we're going to put that in place so that there's no movement at all. And then you don't want to pull, or you don't want to pull on this, because remember, the jelly roll strips, they stretch. So we don't want to do that. We don't want to encourage any more stretching. We just want to lie it flat and pin it. Something else. Okay, so here's what I do now. I skip a little bit of that middle section, and I come down here to the right. So let's say things are not lining up. By going ahead and extending to the very end, you can kind of make some minor adjustments in the middle there. And I actually pinned more than what I normally do. But the beauty of this is that it looks like it's completely lining up. There's no accidents. There's no ripples or anything, so that's good. But I will admit that sometimes there is a row that sometimes will end up being a little bit longer than the other one. And if that is, just kind of incorporate it somewhere in the middle, and preferably near a seam if you can. Okay, so I need to get this quilt along done, and you guys if you're at this point of the quilt, you already know how to sew a 1/4 inch seam. So we're going to pretend I'm at my sewing machine. This is where we're going to sew 1/4 inch seam all the way down the right side until we get to the very end. And yes, I'm going to back stitch, even though people tell me I don't have to. So sew all the way, and when you're done, you're going to have 1 and 2 connected. After you do 1 and 2, then I want you to do 3 and 4, and then 5 and 6, and then you can add 7 later. So what I've done already, to save myself some time, because I did want to get this quilt along wrapped up, I have already done 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So I only work with 2 rows at a time, because I found that to line up the quilt, it works a whole lot better. So again, you're going to sew 3 to 4, you're going to sew 5 to 6, and then you'll add 7 at the end. So now I'm going to go upstairs, I'm going to sew 1 and 2 together, and then I'm going to sew 3 to 2, and we're going to have one big piece. We still have more sashing to add, so I'll be back and I'll show you how to do that pinning. Okay, so hold tight. Okay, I am back. So I have all of my rows sewn together. Now the next step is we are going to add we need to add one more sashing over here on the first row. So what I'm going to do is remember we have 3 more pieces of sashing to add. So one of them is going to go to the first. And so all I'm going to do is turn this over and pin it. Start down here on, let me find the middle here. Okay, so starting down here at the end, and I'm going to I'm going to match up my seams right here, okay? And I'm going to pin it. And then I'm going to work to the right. So just like last time, I'm going to pin to the right first. Okay, so just like previously, I'm going to go up there, I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam all the way down, and then I'm going to trim off this extra. So I will be back. Okay, I am back, and I have sewn the sashing on to the left side over here. And now we are ready to add our sashing to the top and to the bottom, and we are completely done. So all I'm going to do now is just take my sashing. I'm going to get up here to my top row. Now, a piece of advice that I'm not going to actually follow today, and I should, but it'll be okay, is that you want to actually press your seams before you add this. I'm going to pin it, and then I'm probably going to unpin it upstairs and then sew it. So what I'm going to do is line up this seam here with this, just like we did before, and I'm going to pin it. And I will probably fast forward this so that you can see the whole process, but you don't have to listen to it, or you can watch it quickly. Okay, so now I'm going to do the exact same thing to the bottom. So I'm just going to turn it around. Here's the bottom, and I'm going to pin it. And then I'm going to sew it. So I'm going to just go ahead and stop the camera, and I will be back after I've sewn both of these on, okay? Okay, so I have added the sashing to the top and the bottom, and now what we want to do is trim off that extra. So I've got my ruler and my cutting pad here. Again, remember, don't pull on it, just let it lie naturally. And hopefully that's lined up. Okay. I think it's time to change my blade. Now let's get the other side. Whoops. Okay, now we're going to do the bottom. Okay, so you can't see it in this picture, but I'll be sure to post pictures. Next, what we're going to do is check for holes and trim all the extra thread. So all these little threads that's coming through, I will trim all of those, and then I will also check it for holes. So now let's measure it so that we can determine our backing fabric and our binding fabric. Okay, so I'm just going to take my tape measure here, and let's see, this is actually the bottom. I want to make sure I don't get the ink pen on here. So at this point you're probably trying to figure out where exactly is the top of your quilt, and so it might be beneficial to leave those pins in for a little while for your rows. I just remember that this is my top left. In fact, my sister always says put a pin in your top left square. That way you'll never lose which is the top of your quilt. Okay, so I'm just going to start over here on the left side. And I'm just going to measure all the way across. Now, when I was beginning this quilt along, I had made a bigger size, so I gave you guys an approximate size, but it looks like I was really not accurate. It was total guesswork because I never made this size. So I think I said it was like 66 by something, but it is actually 58 and a half by, I guess you have to take into consideration all of the seams. So it seemed like it was going to be a little bit bigger than what I anticipated based on how many blocks. Now if you wanted to make it bigger, you just add more rows, or you cut your fabric in bigger squares. I'll make sure I go and adjust the instruction sheet too to reflect the actual size. Okay, I believe that's 67. Again, I will confirm these measurements before I post it on my website, okay? Okay, so now I'm going to open up my iPhone, and we're going to be using the Robert Kaufman quilting calculator. I'm just going to open it up, and we're going to skip the banner part. Skip. We're going to click on backing and batting. We want to type in that it's 58 and a half by 67. And I'm going to use 8 as the overage. Ask your long arm quilter what they prefer. And then I'm going to click on calculate. So that means I need 4 5/8 yard of backing fabric. Then I'm going to get out of this one. And then I'm going to go to the binding. And my binding strip is going to be 2 inches. Again, I got that from a long arm quilter. So my width is 58 and a half by 67. It is going to be the bias binding, and click calculate. And I need a 1/2 yard for binding fabric. Okay, so that wraps up our Lulu Roses quilt along.